Hello everybody. I am sorry I'm not able to be there with you in person. I always look forward to being in space with Ending Violence Association. I support the work that you're all doing so much. I have been navigating a whole bunch of things for the last 2 years, and if any of you have followed kind of my journey and what's been going on, there's a lot of things that have been going on, and so I just want to say that I want to thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and I hope that the words that I share today can help give you some medicine as you continue doing the work that you do. Syilx stamia manimchilch in chai kin Syilx Secwépemc. What I said was, hello, good day, elders, family, friends, leaders, young people, two-spirit and non-binary folks. My name is Keynote and I'm from the Syilx and Secwépemc Nation. My name was given to me on the day that I was born from my tama and loosely translates into standing by water. My English name is Elaine Alec, and my late father was Saul Kinsey Basil from the Bonaparte Indian Band, and he was the son of Saul and Louisa Basil. And my late mother was Sophie Alec from the Penticton Indian Band from the Syilx Nation, and she was the daughter of the late Chief Jack Alec and Elaine Alec. So I think there's 3 things that I want to talk about today. The first one is about the power of storytelling and how I use storytelling as a healing practice. I want to talk about what it means to step into your purpose with clarity and courage. And I want to talk about how the Cultivating Safe Spaces framework can support the anti-violence sector in this moment. So for the first part, I want to talk a little bit about my experience in writing my book. I should say books now. So I wrote, my first book was called Calling My Spirit Back, and my book that I just released this year is called Coming of Age. And Coming of Age Calling My Spirit Back tells my story about growing up as an Indigenous girl in Canada, and the trauma that I experienced and the things that I had been through, and all of my life experiences, including racism and misogyny and abuse, and kind of how I came through that. And I always talk about how that first book was, there were so many versions of that book before it came to be what it was. And what I learned about writing was that if I wanted to support healing, I had to learn how to write from the scar and not the wound. And so I really took that into practice when I was writing. The first versions of my book were my story for me, and I knew that I would edit it and take that lens of, am I writing from the wound right now, or am I writing from the scar? And to not hide behind silence and shame, and that I was going to be honest about my journey, all parts of my journey, even the parts that I was accountable for in my life. And that there's a balance, because I have been a victim and I've been an abuser, and I have shame with all of that. And learning to decolonize my healing and decolonize the way that I see the world and how I do things is understanding that as human beings, we are both right and wrong, and we are good and bad. And you don't have to be stuck in one or the other. Just because you've done bad things doesn't mean you have to be bad forever. Just because you're good doesn't mean you're not allowed to make mistakes. And so that's been an entire journey for me, and the way that I move forward in the world. And it's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of discomfort. It's hard to heal. It's hard to look at all those parts of yourself and feel the feelings instead of numbing them, and not hiding behind keeping busy or trying to fix everybody else so that I don't have to fix myself. So I wrote Coming of Age to talk about doing hard things, and I wrote it to talk about the importance of identity, and I wrote about it to remove the feeling of shame around identity and reconnecting to who you are. And I wrote about how silence shaped my early life and how not being able to tell my story let the shame grow. And sharing it didn't erase the harm that had been done to me, but it brought me back into relationship with myself and my community. And so that's why I believe that storytelling isn't just something we do. It's not, it's not just something that we do. There's meaning to it. It's a way of reclaiming your own power. And so when survivors of gender-based violence or any trauma, when people choose to tell their story in their own words, they regain agency. I regain my power every time I speak my truth and my story, even in places where my voice is, shook, and where my hands have been sweaty and where my gut has been tight. And I've told my story even when I felt like I was going to throw up, even when I felt like I was going to have diarrhea in that moment. That's how much my body was holding in all of this stuff. And so with my book Coming of Age, it also shows that the listener matters, and that survivors feel not only your words, but your nervous system. And so if you're rushing, if you're burned out, if you're on autopilot, you might look supportive, but your body may be signaling danger. And that mismatch can erode trust. So we might think that, we're a safe space and we're a safe person. But if we're supporting and doing this work from that dysregulation where we're not dealing with our own stuff, it erodes that trust. And this is why regulating yourself isn't self-indulgence. It isn't navel gazing. It isn't, just something that's nice to do. It's necessary. And healing isn't linear. It doesn't always look like progress, but when a survivor is met by a regulated and grounded listener, they're more likely to feel safe enough to tell the story they've been carrying. And that's where the change in the healing begins. Sometimes we hold things in. I've had elders come tell me their stories after hearing mine, and I've been the first person that they've ever shared that story with for something that they've been carrying for 60 years. And so, to be able to stay in space and be regulated, and to understand that you are safe in this moment now, and that you don't have to move back to that part of your brain where you become negative and cynical, and where you become burned out and exhausted. That you can still stay in the here and now when you hear hard things, and not go back to that place where you get overly emotional in a space. And I talk about that in my Cultivating Safe Spaces training, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, storytelling is so important for so many reasons. The other part that I wanted to talk about is stepping into purpose with clarity and courage. And it's not about perfection or being superhuman. Colonialism has done a really good job at making us believe we have to be perfect performing machines here to do the job, never making mistakes, and that we have to be on all the time, and we're not allowed to say the wrong thing, and we start working from a place of fear. And that's something that I talk about. There's trauma-informed approaches, and then people say there's Indigenous trauma-informed approaches, and there's decolonized trauma-informed approaches. Indigenous, decolonized aren't always the same thing. You can be Indigenous and doing Indigenous things and still work from a colonial mindset. And for me, what colonial means when I teach and I do this work, colonial is anything that is made from a place of fear and control. So if you make decisions from a place of fear and control, you create agendas from a place of fear and control, create policies from a place of fear and control, that is most likely upholding colonial systems. And fear isn't a bad thing, but fear becomes a bad thing when you feel fear and then move to try to control because of that fear. And so to be able to understand that, like, when are you making decisions from a place of fear and control, and when can you get regulated enough to start making decisions from a place of love, a place of trust, and a place of faith, and having clarity in that, because clarity means knowing yourself. It means understanding your triggers, your story, and what your nervous system needs to stay steady. It's not what people tell you, because we're not the same. We are triggered by different things. We feel safe from different things. We feel belonging from different things. We feel connected from different things. So just because something helps you feel belonging, connected, and safe, it doesn't mean that it makes somebody else feel belonging, connected, and safe. And you can't make people feel safe. You don't have that power. You don't know their story. The only thing that you can do is to cultivate that belonging, connection, and safety within yourself so that you can continue to show up and make good decisions from the best part of yourself and not the dysregulated, triggered, emotional part of yourself. And emotions are good. One of the things I share, and this triggers people, this will trigger people and get people angry. But what I share is that you don't always have a right to a space. People like to say everybody deserves a seat, everybody deserves a space. And that's from that, like, you have a right to. And our elders would always say, you have to be careful what you claim a right to, because with a right comes a responsibility. So just because you say you have a right to a space doesn't mean you have a right to show up and behave any way that you want. Doesn't mean you have a right to come in, and yell at people or be upset with people, even when your feelings are justified by injustices that have happened. We are accountable to how we show up in spaces, and we as a society have lost the ability to know how to regulate ourselves. And that's what my book Coming of Age talks about. It's that we are humans, we are born human, we will experience hard things, we will struggle, we will have trauma, we will experience loss. That's a fact of life. You cannot get away with it. And so you can't get away from it when you're born a human being. And as a human being, through coming of age, we are supposed to be taught tools to stay regulated when those hard things happen. And not a lot of us have had that privilege to learn these things. And so that's what my book was about, was, helping remind people and teaching those things that some may not have received. And that ability to show up, as somebody that contributes in a good way, lives their purpose, and is able to be solutions-based, who is able to be productive and creative and forward-thinking, and not work from a place of powerlessness, of not feeling like hopelessness. If you're showing up in a decision-making space, if you're there to support family, community, nation, land, you need to be at the best part of your mind, body, and spirit to be in that space. And trauma has happened to humans from the beginning of time. Bad things have happened to humans from the beginning of time. But we had protocols and tools and ways of bringing ourselves back into a space so that we didn't crumble from that. I think a lot of people mistake feeling safe and feeling uncomfortable. You know, I always share cultivating safe spaces isn't about silencing voices we don't like. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable and it sucks to hear voices we don't like, to hear things we don't like, to be around people we don't like. It triggers us, makes us feel small, makes us feel angry, makes us feel all these things, and then we blame and lash out because we don't feel safe either. And a lot of times what I share with people is like, do I really feel unsafe in this moment? Or am I just really uncomfortable? And if I feel unsafe in this moment, is it because of this person in front of me? Or is it because this experience is tied to something real, you know, in my life where I really wasn't safe? And so you just never know. You never know how people perceive safety or how they view you or how they see you. You might not think that, you know, you're doing anything wrong or that you haven't said anything wrong or that you're the safest person in the world, you know, but I do this work. People hire me for cultivating safe spaces, and I have been told that somebody has not felt safe in a space with me, you know. So, you know, we can always do our best, but we're all humans and we don't know people's stories or how people respond to the way that we show up in a space. So, you know, understanding self is a huge part of the Cultivating Safe Spaces framework. And love-based practice is a huge part of the framework. They're the 4 necessary conditions. Love-based practices. Am I deciding from fear and control, or am I deciding from love, trust, and faith? And then patience is the third one, where we talk about patience with your humanness and patience with humanness of other people. You know, do you have patience for yourself and your humanness, your team, the people you serve? You know, the people, the voices in the room that you might not like, you know, can you see their humanness? And the discipline of listening. And that is exactly what it means, discipline. Are you disciplined enough to listen to all of the voices in the room without judging what they're saying as right or wrong, good or bad? Can you listen to the voice that walks into the room that you absolutely do not like? And when you make a commitment to listen with discipline, that means you have to have a strong understanding of self, because you will hear things you do not like. You will hear things that you think are harmful. You will hear things that make you uncomfortable. And depending on, you know, what you're doing or what's going on, if you're facilitating a space or leading a space, you start to be afraid about the other people in the room. Are they being harmed? Are they okay? Are they being triggered? And then you might try to control the space by silencing that voice that is making the room uncomfortable. You know, and in that moment, we uphold exclusion. You know, it's you move into that space of trying to control and silence voices you don't like, because we can't handle it anymore. We can't handle hearing things we don't like. And instead of asking ourselves, why do I feel this way? Where is it coming from? We silence, so we don't have to feel that or go through that. And then the healing never happens, because when you avoid feeling those things, the discomfort, the pain, the, you know, those things that come up for you, you're stunting your healing, you're stunting your growth. And, you know, we found so many ways to numb so that we don't have to process and feel. You have to feel in order to heal. So every time we choose to silence a voice because we don't like it, it's tough. Can't always do it. We can't always do it. We can't always be the human being that shows up in the room and allows, you know, violence to happen by words, or by physical touch. But understanding that a lot of times when somebody shows up in a room and they're activated, it's because they are triggered and they are working from the lower part of their brain. And then we come into that space where we're constantly working from the trauma part of our brain, the emotional part of our brain. So, you know, when I think about courage and showing up as who you are to support people who are experiencing hard things, or you're somebody who, wants to support spaces where healing conversations are happening. It can be hard. It can be hard to hear things you don't want to hear or things that you don't agree with. And it's a courage to be able to speak up and be in a space when you're activated. So one of the things that I share is like, you need to understand yourself enough to know, are you okay to be in this space? Is that a space that you need to be in that moment? Is that a decision-making circle that you should be in at this time? Because sometimes we can't do it based on the amount of sleep we've had, the amount of things we've been going through, the experiences that we've had. It may be harder to regulate ourselves. And it's okay to step away as helpers. It's okay to step away and take care of yourself so you can show up as your best and most regulated self. And so it's courage. It takes courage to slow down when everything around you is speeding up. It takes courage to show up regulated and honest instead of running on fumes. So when I think about my kids, I think about the systems they're growing up in, and I don't want them inheriting a world where people confuse urgency for leadership or control for care. And that's why this work matters to me, not just for me and the people that I know and work with, but for my kids and, future generations, that every act of regulation and relational leadership that we practice today becomes the environment that my kids and their peers will live in tomorrow. And so, when we're activated, when we're working from our triggers, when we are negative and cynical and burned out and unable to focus and unable to, think clearly, that's a ripple effect. We're passing that on. And it's hard to be regulated because that requires healing and understanding self. The last thing that I want to talk about is how Cultivating Safe Spaces framework can support the anti-violence sector. And so, again, when I think about coming of age, it not only talks about my personal story, but it also talks about the systemic conditions that shaped it. Racism, sexism, colonial policies that still show up in services today. And those conditions haven't gone away. They've just changed shape. We still live within this colonial system, no matter how hard we try to do things different. No matter how many different faces we put in a space, different bodies we put in a space, we're still living within a colonial system, especially when we uphold exclusion, shame, sickness, and oppression and control. And we're in a political, economic, and social moment where polarization is high and resources are thin, and that environment breeds burnout and survival mode. So Cultivating Safe Spaces is a framework that helps provide another option. It's not just a checklist, it's a set of practices that you can use to keep your humanity intact while you work. It helps people regulate before responding. It helps people slow down and decide from love rather than fear. And it holds accountability as care and not punishment. And it builds teams where people can tell the truth without bracing for impact. It allows us to be human. Hard on systems, soft on people. Colonialism is strong because we want to focus on blaming people that are a result of the systems that we've been raised in, instead of us focusing on the system, the root causes for why things are the way that they are. And that's what Cultivating Safe Spaces helps identify. It helps identify those root causes, the systemic issues that continue to show up everywhere, even in our advocacy work, even in our social justice movements, even in, those colonial mindsets still show up in those spaces where we uphold exclusion, we uphold shame, we uphold control, we uphold sickness. We expect ourselves to be these perfect performing machines who aren't human, who don't need to eat, who don't need to drink water, who don't need to take care of ourselves. We have to perform and show up and be productive. And we have to put ourselves last in order to show that we care. Every time we do that, we uphold colonialism. And so I always say, when you're able to show up and be human, and when you're able to show up in a space and have your tears and be vulnerable, that is decolonizing. And so when you use Cultivating Safe Space in this way, you're not just serving survivors, you're modeling a different way of leading inside your organization. And you're showing staff and you're showing funders and community partners what safety actually feels like, and not just what it says on paper. And so, I think it's important that we learn to pause, practice patience, ask ourselves in this moment, what makes me feel belonging, connected, and safe? What makes me feel belonging, connected, and safe? And then understand that what makes you feel belonging, connected, and safe isn't the same thing that is going to be needed for the person beside you or across the room for you. Being able to name it, to tame it. There's neuroscience around that, naming things out loud, saying it out loud. We're so afraid. We're so stuck in silence and shame. And if you're dysregulated, it's okay to say, I'm triggered right now. I just need a moment. Be honest. That honesty cultivates trust, and hold boundaries as care. And, boundaries aren't rejection. They are the structure that helps make safety possible. And, boundaries is understanding what it is that you need to feel belonging, connected, and safe. They don't have to be big gestures, and they, don't need to be, policy. They are just small, repeatable actions that add up to a culture of safety. So every one of us has inherited stories about what safety means, who deserves protection, how healing should happen, the right way, the wrong way, the good way, the bad way, I'm right, you're wrong. And some of the stories we have are outdated and even harmful, and some are still useful. But we get to decide. We trust our instinct. We trust that feeling, that gut feeling about, which ones we keep, which stories we keep, and which stories we get to rewrite. And so I didn't write, and I don't share anything that I do as if I promise transformation in a single moment. I don't promise change in a single moment. It's about patience. It's about small increments. It's about understanding real sustainable change happens in 1%, 2% increments. You can't change things overnight, and it sucks because, yes, I know people are dying. I know it's hard. I know that we need something now, but that's not how change happens, and it's about the repetitiveness and the hearing things over and over and over again. And it's about that relational work of continuing to come back to yourself and take responsibility for how you show up. Healing at scale begins with how you regulate yourself in the very next interaction after this keynote, and that's where the work becomes real. And so that's the type of world that I want my kids to inherit. So I, again, want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I hope that you get to connect and feed yourself and, drink your water and connect with people and feel that sense of belonging in your space, and maybe reset and take a moment to slow down, sleep in a little bit this week, do something for yourself that contributes to your well-being. So thank you again, Wai Limlim, Tiayati Sin Syilx. Thank you, all my relations.